Welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to discuss how to handle training and rest leading up to tournaments. I think we'll talk about this from a couple of different angles in terms of how to think about your schedule or calendar for the year, in terms of maybe selecting events to play, and then how to sort of plan out that time, but also think more about that rest piece, the importance of it, and maybe some different ways to go about rest to ensure that you're not feeling tired or even exhausted. You may be going into matches or key tournaments. I think Brian and I have discussed different situations where athletes that we've worked with, both tennis players and athletes outside of tennis, have talked about going into events tired, which is obviously not ideal or not where you want to be. So I think, our goal will be to discuss more about the problem and then come up with some potential approaches that people can take to try to both avoid that potential exhaustion and go into tournaments where you feel that you've done a lot of training, but that also you feel well rested and ready for what comes next. And before we get into the episode, I wanted to take a moment to mention our sponsor, Go Sport. And as a listener of the Tennis IQ podcast, you get 10% off Go Sport products at gosport.com, GEAU sport.com, by using the discount code TennisIQ10. Visit gosport.com and be sure to check out their selection of premium gear bags for tennis and pickleball. Brian and I both use their bags, and they are fantastic. Again, you can use the discount code TennisIQ10 to get 10% off all products at gosport.com, GEAU sport.com.
So, Josh, I think this is a good topic, and maybe what I'd like to do is relate kind of a story or an anecdote of a particular client, because we can look at the pros and like, all right, they do this and that, but that's also their job. And for many of us, who are not pros or people who listen, they can't dedicate their entire schedules to tennis. So this is a player who he plays national events and high-level local events, and he's the kind of guy who certainly does plan out his calendar and knows what he's going to be playing from week to week or over the course of different months. And he plays a lot of singles, plays a lot of doubles. But he also, has a professional life. And for him, as of late, that professional life has been difficult. It's been more stressful. It's required him to actually work more than he has normally done. And it's having an impact on his, his energy level, his ability to, he's feeling tired. He's feeling tired mentally, feeling tired physically. And as we were going through some of his reflections from the past couple of weeks, I can see the tiredness coming out in the reflections through certain activities he's not persevering on like he normally would. In doubles, his ability to be patient with his partner, much less. His focus on what he's trying to do and his decision-making, definitely compromised there. And so as we're talking, he's getting ready for another event. My, prescription for the first part was, all right, we need to work on your energy. Your, energy is essentially our capacity to do things. And so we have to pay attention to the sources of energy. So we talked about, all right, how's your sleep going? And that was the one that he's really been struggling with. It's the stress of the job is getting to him, and he's really stressed out at night, and he's not sleeping nearly as well. So we looked at, okay, we can't do anything about the professional stuff this weekend. So let's simply focus on getting a good amount of sleep tonight and all through the weekend, so that you can start to feel a little bit more refreshed. Because I think when we look at energy, and if we relate this directly to tennis, Josh, I think when we are tired or fatigued mentally, physically, our focus our ability to focus is much less. We're much more easily distracted, pulled out of the zone or pulled out of whatever flow you're in. Even your motivation and determination could be less. It's easier to kind of quit in a way, to stop fighting. Our ability to just control our emotions is much, much less. And all of that, I think, then leads to one of the more important mental skills that we've talked about a lot here, but I don't think gets a lot of airplay normally, which is decision making. Your ability to make the right decisions goes down because you're looking to maybe bail out of points, trying to win too much, trying to force things. So your energy level has a direct impact on your performance mentally and physically, obviously. So as we begin to prepare for tournaments, we're looking to get that energy capacity up and try to get it to a point where, when I hit the court, I feel ready to be playing. So this is just an example of someone who is not a pro, who plays a lot of tennis, has a schedule that he plans out each year, but then sometimes life changes things. And that can happen to pros as well. Different things happen. But we want to make sure that we're recognizing that. Maybe we just need to forgive ourselves for whatever is going on, or maybe not. Maybe just accept it. And, all right, can I do the best that I can right now? I know I can't fix this problem on the court. I still want to play this tournament. Let me go out and give it my best shot instead of letting other areas bleed into what I'm doing. So I think we can kind of then come back to a higher level, Josh, based on your intro. But I thought perhaps sharing that story of a real client and what he's going through as he is, playing some of these bigger events might be more relevant than necessarily just looking at the pro example.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. And I had a situation recently that I can share where I was talking to a track and field athlete, and and he was sharing about and sort of feeling tired or exhausted in a different way, right? Not like your client, where it's maybe at least partly based on things outside of his sport, in terms of his professional life. But for this athlete, it was more based on their training, right? He was feeling like, I want to do more, I want to do more, I want to do more, and this feeling that I think a lot of athletes have, a lot of elite athletes have of more is always better, right? And maybe not giving himself the time to rest and recover, and then he'd go into events already feeling exhausted, already feeling physically and mentally tired. So, and then, talking about how he didn't feel like it was necessarily his best performance. So, we talked about some ways to try to help him prioritize that rest, try to also set, which I think we could talk more about, set some clear boundaries for himself. So, for him, we talked about having one day of rest and then maybe a lighter day leading up to an event, right? And for each person, it's going to be different. I also think there's a certain amount of tinkering and trial and error that can take place. For example, maybe someone establishes that they want to have one full day of rest leading up to a tournament. Okay, can we test that out for maybe a practice match? And okay, I want to play a practice match after having not played the day before. Or maybe it's I want to have one full day off and then one, lighter day of hitting before I play. Can I also test that out? Maybe in a smaller event, maybe in a practice match, something like that, so that we can see how it goes for us. Because what might work for you, Brian, or what might be different than what works for me, might be different than what works for somebody else. So I think that, having some clear guidelines, some clear boundaries for yourself can make a really big difference here, but it's also individual, right? Different things tend to work for different people. And I think there's a process that people can go about to really determine what works for them, through that trial and error process.
And I think at the pro level, one of the things that, we were discussing earlier was you have obviously big events. There's 4 big major events. And then there are maybe the next level down. You've got these different Master Series events for both the men and the women. And how do we approach getting ready for that? We had an episode, I don't know, some time ago, Josh, about changing surfaces. A lot of sports don't have that. So, as we're recording this, we're in the midst of Wimbledon, and it's a very short grass season, but you kind of have to play a grass tournament or two to really get yourself accustomed to the surface. So there's always like these lead up events that hopefully are preparing you for a great performance in the big event. And I think it's important that we are approaching those lead up events again with energy in mind. You mentioned, and you give some examples of this. Like, there's always a tournament the week before these majors. Some players play them, and some players don't. And it kind of gets to what you were saying. Because, there's sort of an idiosyncratic approach to this. There's no one right way. It's just really finding the right way for you. And it goes the same for those of us who are playing league tennis or tournaments. We may not have so much of a lead up to it, but we want to make sure that in our schedule, we're designing it such that when the important events come, you feel good. You not only feel rested, but you also feel like your game is sharp and where it needs to be. It can excel in this particular event. There's no obviously have to win in tennis, but of course there are going to be events in which you would really like to bring your best performances. There's nothing wrong with that. And we should look to have some events like that. And then maybe other events are more experimental or learning purpose. And we're using those again to build up and practice for the big one. So I think that how we lead up to important events in our calendar, not only from the energy perspective, but also just from the competitive perspective, is important, because you could also get burned out competitively. There are, of course, some players who thrive, or seem to, on playing all the time. There are probably some names that do this now, Josh, that I may not know, but the guy I remember most for this is a Russian guy, Yevgeny Kafelnikov, who seemed to play 52 weeks a year. And, I don't know exactly why. Maybe it's money, maybe it's something else, but he was always playing. And then you kind of wind the clock back even further, and you look at a guy like Bjorn Borg, who tried to really pare down his schedule, especially as he, not that he was getting old, but like 25, 26, he actually only wanted to play I think 13 or 14 events a year. That's far fewer than, say, a Kafelnikov playing 48 or more per year. So we are all a little bit different, and we have to figure out why we're doing what we do, and start to monitor how it makes us feel, both mentally and physically. But I think these are good things to keep in mind as you build up toward your big events, because I think everybody who listens to this is participating in something that may have some sort of culminating event. It could be a league with some playoffs. It could be a series of tournaments. It could be something else. But there's usually some sort of build up to some final type of thing that goes on. And for the most part, maybe not everybody has that, but we often do. And we want to do our best in those either playoffs or finals or those big events. So we want to make sure we're really paying attention to how we build up and get ourselves ready for that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of important points here. I mean, as you said, at the pro level, there's quite a range, right? Some players seem to play every week and every opportunity that they can. And there's obviously reasons for this, right? I mean, financially, there's, benefits to there can be benefits to playing more tournaments. You give yourself more opportunities to win, prize money and points for your ranking, which can give you other opportunities to play in tournaments. So there obviously can be benefits to playing more. Also, some players feel that they can maybe get in more of a rhythm when they play more, but there are a lot of benefits to rest. And I think we saw this with on the men's side, the big three, Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. And I think on the women's side, I mean, I think Serena and Venus were really excellent examples of this as well. Where I think with all of these players, sort of as they went from the beginning of their career more into the middle of their career, and definitely towards the end of it as well, they started playing in fewer tournaments. They prioritized rest more. They weren't playing in nearly as many of the smaller tournaments, and really tried to prioritize the majors, the Grand Slams throughout the year, right? Yes, they were playing in Masters level events. Yes, there's certain selects, let's say on the ATP side, 250s or 500s that they might have a certain incentive here or there to play, or maybe leading up to a Grand Slam, they're playing in one or two, lead up tournaments. But the number of tournaments that they're playing compared to the vast majority of the top 10 or top 20 players is significantly fewer. And I think that is really a reason for their longevity, right? I think when we look at how all of those players played into their later 30s or even 40 and beyond, it's because they managed to prioritize their bodies and give themselves that rest. So I think that's really key. But again, everybody's different and everybody figures out sort of with themselves and with their coach and with the team around them what works best for them. And they're, again, just as we were talking about sort of short term, there can be trial and error and tinkering. It can also be sort of a season by season process of being able to look back and reflect and say, okay, I played in 28 tournaments this year. Was that the right amount for me? Right? Was that too much? Was that just enough? Was that not enough? Right? And going through, just like a WTA or ATP Pro can go through that process. I think that people that are listening here, USTA league players or junior players or parents can go through a similar process and say, okay, are we playing the right number of tournaments? And are we sort of spacing out our bigger events as well? Right. I mean, if we look at the pros, and obviously they have their schedule in terms of the largest events kind of spaced out throughout the year, right? If we think about especially at the highest level of professional tennis with the majors, those four events are spaced out throughout the year. I think it can be a helpful process for players to look at the calendar for maybe a year or at least 6 months and be able to identify what are the most important events to me, right? And maybe even before that, starting with what are some of my goals for the year or sort of my vision for the year. And I think we could start there and then look at based on that vision that I have, which events are most important, which events do I want to prioritize, and then let's make sure that leading up to each of those we do build in that rest. We do make sure that we're coming in with a fully charged battery, so to speak, and that we're not completely overdoing it before an event, right? We're not traveling way too much in the days leading up to an event. We're not playing too many matches and depleting ourselves in that way right before an event, but we're feeling like we're training in a solid way, but also really prioritizing that rest so that we do feel, fully charged and fully ready for those biggest events of the year. And there's this concept within strength and conditioning and used in sports psychology and certain sports more so, called periodization, where essentially we think about sort of our competitive schedule and training schedule, and we're strategic about it. And in strength and conditioning, often that's sort of about ramping up in certain times and then sort of slowing down or taking our foot off the gas in other moments. But I think we can think about that, in we can't be necessarily going 110% 52 weeks a year, right? Maybe Kafelnikov was able to do that, but I think for most that's not going to work, right? So we want to be able to pick and choose and prioritize really what matters most, right? If a top 10 ATP or WTA player is looking at their calendar, they aren't prioritizing the majors and some of their smaller tournaments in the same way. They might have to pull out of a smaller tournament. They might, decide to play fewer of those. They might decide to give themselves that extra week of rest because they know the importance of those larger tournaments, the amount of money on the line, the amount of points on the line, the potential impact that a tournament like that could really have for their career. And they want to do everything that they possibly can to make sure that gets prioritized and gets sort of the attention that it deserves.
I think the exercise of looking at, let's say, you could even start this now to a certain degree, or maybe in the fall. What do I want my 2026 to look like? And building in those concepts, Josh, of periodization, knowing that it will be hard because the industry won't do it for you. Meaning, and then there are different pressures. So what I mean by the industry, so if let's say you're not a pro, you're a junior player or even an adult player, tennis never stops. And the reason it never stops is not because that's what's good for you. It's what's good financially and economically for clubs and leagues and the USTA or other governing bodies. As much as the USTA wants to have people take time or whatever, to take time off, the system isn't built that way. And the same with the ratings and the rankings. Again, the national federations can talk about how, yeah, you need to do this and take time and whatever, but you have built a system that rewards people for playing all the time. So, at the pro level, okay, maybe it's money and points. And if you're, a player who's in the 400s and 500s, do you just take weeks off when you could be out there potentially winning matches and money and points? It's really hard. So it takes some discipline to look at your calendar and say, all right, this is going to be a training block. This is going to be this. And we had a little bit of this discussion with David Samuel some time ago about how he took a group of players and they did a solid 6 or 8 week training block before the season. And then they iterated on that in future years. So I think it makes a lot of sense to do that because, again, no one else is going to do it for you. And if you can look at what you want to play, this again reminds me of another client, Josh, who in his 50s at the time, and he showed me the calendar he had, tournament calendar for the next year. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot of tournaments. And he's like, yeah, I played 82 competitive matches last year. I was like, that's a lot of matches. I mean, how are you feeling? Well, this is kind of hurting. That's kind of hurting. In a lot of adult tournaments, it's not a sort of a one and done in terms of playing. There are often back draws or consolation draws, and a lot of times senior players will also play doubles. So this guy did a lot of that. So he had back draw matches, he had doubles matches, but 82 matches for a guy, competitive matches. This doesn't even count practices and all that. It's a lot of tennis on somebody in his, mid to late 50s. And he was feeling it. So I really pushed him to kind of make the schedule smaller. Play some of the bigger ones. Let's be smarter. A lot of the things that we've been talking about today really tried to build more into his calendar such that he could feel better energy and not feel these injuries that one feels in his 50s that, through such repetition over the years or playing a lot on hard courts or grass courts, these surfaces can be very difficult on the body for sure. And so then his next year, the quality of play was better. His body felt better. In fact, his body's felt better since then. He's probably 4 or 5 years older now than when we had that initial conversation. And the reason he was playing so much is he just loved being out there. It wasn't, Like, I need points, I need to get ranked. He just loved like traveling to these events, and these are cool places I get to play. But we just had to dial it back a little bit and pick the events that he really, really likes and wants to play. If he wants to play the Worlds, if he wants to play different, level one tournaments or big tournaments locally, great. But we don't need to play all these other things as well. So I think it's a really worthwhile exercise for everybody to look at the next year. What leagues are you playing? What tournaments do you want to play? Where's the travel to? How can I space out my activities such that if there's a big event or a big league playoff, I'm ready for that. I've cleared out my calendar. I'm ready to compete and do my best.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that yeah, a lot of people that play all the time, what you were describing, could benefit from being able to prioritize rest a little bit more by playing instead of 82 competitive matches, maybe it's 50, right? Maybe it's, somewhat less. And I also get, there are reasons why people want to play a lot, right? Tennis, we've talked about, some of the many benefits of playing and playing competitively, right? In terms of somebody's fitness, in terms of somebody's, sort of that competitive urge that they have, right? People love being out there. So even suggesting somebody play less can be tough.
Yeah, it sounds
Because
weird, right? It's like, yeah,
exactly. But sometimes there are cases where less is more, and by being able to pick and choose a little bit more, we're able to yeah the quality can really go up, right? If we were able to prioritize quality over quantity, that doesn't necessarily mean pushing it every single week, right? It means okay, there's certain times where I'm 100% all in. And then there's other times where I'm really prioritizing rest a lot more. And, I think a lot of people will find that that leads to, being able to fully be able to give everything that they have in terms of their energy. And I like that you bring up the energy piece. And I think that, people can try to, maybe think back in terms of certain moments where they felt maybe more depleted going into matches. And try to, if you can think back, try to think about, okay, well, what was going on there, right? Did I have other things going on in my life? Did I have a lot going on with work? Had I been traveling a lot? I know for myself, as somebody that does tend to travel a good bit, there's certain moments where, maybe I came back from a long flight recently, and it is going to be harder for me to play at my best, right? I sometimes I think jokingly say that jet lag doesn't impact me, but realistically, I think it impacts everybody. And I think people need to be realistic that if you do have a lot going on with work, or there's things going on in your personal life, or you have been traveling a lot, or if you've been playing a lot, that it's going to impact you. And it's inevitable. So I think rather than trying to just put on a brave face and saying, "Oh, I'm fine," being able to acknowledge that and give yourself that rest that really is needed. I think you were bringing this up earlier um, before we started potentially, but yeah, talking about Roger Federer and the way that he would really prioritize his sleep, and the amount of number of hours that he would get in a day, especially in the major tournaments. And it's yeah, obviously um, he's a professional athlete. That is his clear number one priority. But I think yeah, whether it's sleep, whether it's days off, whether it is more active recovery, or doing certain things that you're passionate about and you enjoy, but maybe don't take the same level of toll on your body. So we're not just saying just sit on the couch. So I think there are active ways to still recover. But yeah, trying to make sure that those things are really thought about, and that you're taking an intentional approach, and you're not just letting a busy tournament and league match and practice schedule just kind of happen where maybe if you take a step back, you realize, you know what, maybe I wasn't at 100% a lot of these times I was out there on the court.
I think another way to look at this, Josh, because our bodies are our greatest asset when we're playing a sport like tennis. We don't always treat them that way, and it makes me think about like, are you treating your body as if it's like a 1981 Toyota Corolla, where maybe it's just got a lot of junk in the back, and it's really dirty. The outside of the car is rusting, and you just don't put a lot into it. Are you looking at your own body that way? Are you just feeding yourself junk? Are you not sleeping enough? Are you not doing the stretching and the whatever? Or are you treating your body like it's, a Ferrari or a Red Bull Formula One race car, where you take really nice care of it? You wash it, you cover it up, you do everything you can so the next day when I take this car out, it's ready. This thing gets, right? If you watch anything around Formula One, I mean, those cars get a lot of TLC. And what if we decided to do that with our own bodies? And I think when I think about that from an energy perspective, it's the sleep piece, it's the nutrition. If you do supplementation, great. It's hydration, certainly more important if you live in hotter weather areas or high humidity areas. Stretching, foam rolling, massage or massage gun, your ice or ice baths. Maybe you use compression boots or, something else to help with recovery. Meditation can certainly help. Relaxation training, breathing exercises, even just some relaxation reading. These are all great ways to just sort of almost like plug yourself in to get to recharge. And I know we've mentioned this book in the past, The Powerful Engagement by Jim Loehr and Tony Schwartz, talks about the oscillation of expending energy and recovering energy. And we've got to look at ourselves, our bodies. It's our greatest physical asset, one of our greatest assets, and you don't get like another one. It seems not yet, at least, right? I mean, it seems we can do some parts, right? You can get a new hip or a new knee, but there's no sort of new full body yet, and so we don't want to treat it poorly. Want to be more mindful. That doesn't mean you have to, be a monk, but you have to be also mindful that you need this body to be there for you. And not only energy wise, but also from a injury, pain perspective, looseness, etc. You want that to be in tip top shape. So again, if you look at a Formula One race, they're not going into these races knowing that their cars have not been properly tuned and cared for. You just can't do well there. But I think we don't, as athletes, always take the same care. Some do, but many of us could do better in that area.
Definitely. No, I think that all makes I think that all makes perfect sense. And I think I think it's about being deliberate. It's about being deliberate, not just letting your tournament schedule just happen, but being thoughtful about it, being deliberate with your practice, being deliberate with your rest. I think you just mentioned a bunch of great ways to do that, and yeah, making sure that you're, again, taking that deliberate approach of looking after your body and looking after your mind, right? I think if we can take that thoughtful approach to it, learn from maybe past situations where it's worked well for us or maybe not worked as well for us, then I think we can, truly set ourselves up for success more.
Great. Well, I think that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. You can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.